Breaking news. The world is in shock. Canada no longer exists as an independent nation. Overnight, 38 million Canadians woke up to find out they're now officially Americans. The maple leaf? Gone. Replaced by the stars and stripes. How did this happen? Is something like this even legal? And more importantly, who allowed this to happen? At first glance, this sounds like a bad joke. A dystopian scenario ripped straight out of an alternative reality. But what if I told you it's not as far-fetched as you think? Let's rewind to February 16th. Newfoundland and Labrador's Premier, Andrew Furey, made a shocking revelation. He claimed that former President Donald Trump was dead serious about making Canada the 51st state of the US. What first sounded like a conspiracy theory turned out to be disturbingly real. Canada's premiers rushed to Washington, desperate to shut down the threat. They thought it was a joke until they were face to face with top White House officials. Trump wasn't laughing. This wasn't a fantasy. This was a real discussion happening at the highest level of the US government. And it didn't stop with Canada. Trump had bigger plans. After his re-election, he once again floated the idea of buying Greenland, a move that outraged Denmark. Panama, also on the radar. Its strategic canal has long been a prime target for US leaders. These weren't idle thoughts. These were serious propositions. But here's where things get even more interesting. The US Constitution is completely silent on annexation. There is no law, no article, no official guideline on how a foreign country can legally become part of the United States. So, if there are no legal barriers, what would actually stop an annexation from happening? The US has no rules against annexation, and that's dangerous. Let's take a moment to consider how absurd this sounds. According to the US Constitution, annexation officially doesn't exist. No chapter, no clause, no article explaining how a foreign country becomes part of the US. But here's the unsettling part. There's nothing that forbids it either. That means only one thing. If the US wants to annex a country, there's no law saying it can't. That's unsettling, isn't it? How can a country that has rules for everything have nothing in place for something this massive? The answer is simple. Because America always finds a way to bend the rules. This isn't the first time the US has expanded its land, and every time it happened, no one saw it coming. History shows that America has annexed land before, even without official rules. And how they did it? That'll shock you. How America has annexed countries in the past. The United States has no official rules for annexation, but that has never stopped them. Time and time again, America has expanded its borders, each time using bolder, smarter, and sometimes outright illegal methods. Annexation by purchasing land, the legal method. One of the earliest and most famous examples happened in 1803. America was young and ambitious. France, under Napoleon, was desperate for cash. President Thomas Jefferson saw an opportunity and offered $15 million for a massive stretch of land, the Louisiana Territory. With a single transaction, the US doubled in size. But here's the problem. The US Constitution says absolutely nothing about buying land from another country. Even Jefferson himself questioned whether the purchase was legal. Yet it happened. And with that, a precedent was set. If the US wants to expand, it will find a way. The Louisiana Purchase was seen as a brilliant move, a simple transaction that changed history. But not every annexation was as smooth. In some cases, the US didn't just buy land. It bent the rules to take it. Annexation through a political loophole, the clever method. Take Texas in the 1840s. After fighting for its independence from Mexico, Texas wanted to join the United States. But there was a problem. If Texas became a state, it would disrupt the delicate balance between slave and free states in the US. A normal annexation would require a 2/3 vote in the Senate, and that vote wasn't there. So what did Congress do? They bent the rules. Instead of annexing Texas through a treaty, they used a joint resolution which only required a simple majority. Just like that, Texas became a state. This proved one thing: if legal obstacles stand in the way, America will find a way around them. And if a loophole isn't enough, then annexation becomes a game of political strategy rather than law. Annexation without consent, the shocking method. But what happens when even political tricks aren't enough? What if the US doesn't wait for permission? That's exactly what happened in Hawaii. In 1893, a coup took place on the islands. American sugar plantation owners, backed by the US military, overthrew Queen Liliuokalani. 5 years later, Hawaii was annexed without a referendum. No vote, no consent from the Hawaiian people. This wasn't diplomacy, this wasn't a purchase. It was a corporate-backed coup executed with American military support. And it set a terrifying precedent. A country doesn't have to want to join the US. It can simply be taken. If loopholes don't work, force becomes an option. And if force works, why stop at Hawaii? But if taking a country by force shocks you, just wait till you hear what the US did to take control of 3 more countries. Annexation through military conquest, the brutal method. By the end of the Spanish-American War, the US took control of the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam. This wasn't a peaceful annexation, this was a military victory. The Philippines fought back and eventually won independence, but Puerto Rico remains a US territory to this day. No vote, no consent from the population, just pure conquest. The common theme? America always finds a way. Each of these annexations was built on the last, first through purchases, then through political loopholes, then through coups, and eventually through outright military force. So the real question is, what if America used these same methods today? What if the US wanted to annex Canada, Greenland, or Panama? Do we really think the country that took Texas and Hawaii without permission would be stopped by modern diplomacy? History says otherwise, and that leaves just one question. How far would the US go to make this happen? History has proven that the United States always finds a way to expand, and if it was possible in the past, why wouldn't it be possible today? Annexation by purchasing land, the legal option. The US has purchased land before in Louisiana, Alaska, so why couldn't it happen again? President Trump proposed buying Greenland from Denmark. The idea was mocked, but here's the surprising part. In 1946, the US had already tried this before. Washington offered $100 million for Greenland. But the world has changed. In the 21st century, sovereignty is more important than ever. Countries no longer sell their land, so while it's technically possible, the chances of a modern nation willingly handing over territory to the US are slim to none. If buying land isn't an option, there's another way. A country could ask to become part of the US. Annexation by voluntary admission, the democratic option. There are places that aren't officially states, but have been tied to the US for decades. The biggest example, Puerto Rico. Multiple referendums have shown that a majority of Puerto Ricans favor statehood, and yet, it's still not a state. Why? Because annexation is more than just a vote. If Puerto Rico became a state, it would shift the balance of power in US politics, bringing new senators, new congressional seats, and new voters. That makes a political time bomb. Not all annexations happen by choice. If a nation falls into chaos, whether through economic collapse, political instability, or failing infrastructure, the US could justify stepping in under the guise of restoring stability, and once involved, history suggests it might never leave. Once again, this isn't speculation. It's already happened. The US controlled the Panama Canal for decades under the justification of keeping it secure. In 1989, they invaded Panama and removed the government, and while Panama is now independent, history shows that if a country is strategic enough, the US won't hesitate to interfere. But there's a modern twist. Annexation in the future might not be physical. Maybe the next form of annexation is digital. The biggest question isn't whether the US could annex a country, the question is, what if it already is? Maybe not with troops or flags, maybe not through official declarations or treaties, but through something far more subtle. Annexation through economic domination. In the 19th century, annexation was about land. In the 21st century, it's about money. The US doesn't need to invade countries if it can control them economically. Look at the role of the US dollar. Most global trade happens in dollars. Nations borrow from the IMF, an organization largely controlled by the US, which means that when a country falls into financial crisis, the US dictates how it recovers. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. South America is a perfect example. Throughout the 20th century, the US either propped up or overthrew governments to maintain its economic influence. And that raises a fundamental question. If a country no longer controls its own economy, how sovereign is it really? But money isn't the only way the US expands its influence. Annexation through military presence. The US military has more than 750 bases in over 80 countries worldwide. Why does the US still have thousands of troops stationed in Japan and Germany 80 years after World War II? Why does the US Navy dominate the South China Sea? Why does the US have military installations in nations that are supposedly independent? This isn't traditional annexation. There's no declaration, no border shift. But if a country relies on permanent US military presence for protection, then how independent is it really? But military control doesn't always come with a flag change. Sometimes occupation exists in a legal gray area, a space between influence and direct ownership. Annexation through military and political control, the gray zone. Annexation doesn't always require new borders. Sometimes it happens through military occupation and political domination without ever making it official. A clear example is Gaza. Officially, Israel claims it withdrew from the territory in 2005, but in reality, it still controls Gaza's borders, airspace, imports, electricity, and even water supply. Gazans cannot freely leave without Israeli permission, and the territory is subject to repeated military operations. This raises a critical question. Does control equal annexation? According to international law, Gaza is not considered part of Israel. But if a country controls everything except the name, then where is the line between influence and annexation? And this isn't an isolated case. Russia controls large parts of eastern Ukraine without formal annexation. China has a military presence in the South China Sea despite territorial claims from other nations. If annexation no longer means planting a flag, but simply exercising full control over a region, then maybe it's happening far more often than we realize. And what if annexation didn't even require physical occupation anymore? Annexation through technological control. The next form of annexation might not happen through tanks, but through technology. Most countries run on American technology. Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Apple dominate the digital infrastructure of the world. If a country relies on US servers, US software, and US algorithms, how much control does it really have? In 2021, a major US oil pipeline was shut down by a cyber attack. What if a similar attack crippled an entire country? What if the only way to keep its economy running depended entirely on US tech companies? Annexation through technology isn't science fiction, it's already happening. What does this mean? The US hasn't added new states in decades, but the methods have changed. Where annexation once happened with weapons and wars, it now happens through money, military presence, and technology. And it's not just the US. Other world powers are using these exact same tactics. Maybe the US doesn't need to sew new stars onto the flag. Maybe they've already annexed the world. So, what do you think? Will America physically annex a country again? Or is modern invisible annexation happening right under our noses? One thing is certain, the world is changing. And maybe this kind of annexation is far more dangerous than we ever imagined. But here's something even more shocking. If the US has found ways to rewrite the rules on annexation, what if it could also remove a sitting president without impeachment? There's a little known constitutional loophole hidden in the 25th Amendment, and it might be the most powerful tool in American politics. Find out how the US president could be taken out of office without the people ever voting for it. And I'll catch you next time.